we now have the ability to get some kind of notification anytime a user clicks on that button inside of our template. So now we're going to try to reverse that behavior. Rather than having our template tell us that something just occurred, we're going to figure out how to stuff information into our template. So in particular, we're going to make sure that whenever a user clicks on this button, rather than doing a console log, we're going to try to update the value of this input right here. So it's going to be very close to the behavior that we need for the final version of our application. Because remember, the end goal is whenever a user clicks on this button, we show some randomly generated password in there. We're not going to randomly generate the password just yet. That's something we'll figure out down the line. So let's figure out how to do this. Before we start to add in any code, I want to give you a very quick reminder on how input elements in normal HTML work in general. I've got a very small code snippet over here just to jog your memory. On the top left-hand side, I've got a very small snippet of HTML, and then on the right-hand side is a preview of what that HTML looks like. So if we show an input element and we give it a value attribute, this is referred to as an attribute right here, then whenever the input is displayed on the screen, the initial starting value of that input is going to be set equal to ASDF. But in other words, if we set the value attribute, that's going to initialize the value of the input. Okay, so with that in mind, let's go back over to our code editor and start writing out some code. All right, I'm going to first begin inside of my app component class file. Inside of here, we're going to set up a new property inside of our class. So at the very top of the class, I'm going to write out password equals empty string like so. Now, if you're not familiar with this syntax inside of a class, that is totally okay. What we have right here is 100% equivalent to defining a constructor function and saying this.password is empty string inside there. So all this line right here does is say that whenever we create a new instance of this class, it is going to have a password property and it's going to start off as an empty string. Then whenever a user clicks on our button, rather than doing the console log, we're going to update the value of that password property. So I'm going to remove the console log and I'll say this.password is some random string instead. So I'll put in something like about my password. All right, so now at this point in time, I want you to just look at this class by itself. Don't worry about any of the other special syntax inside of here. Don't worry about the fact that we're using Angular. Just look at the class. The class by itself is really simple and straightforward in nature. The class has one property, password. When we first create an instance of this class, password is an empty string. And then if we ever call this method right here, we're going to update the value of password. That is it. So by itself, the class is very simple and straightforward in nature. Now here's where things start to get a little bit more complicated. We now need to make sure that we somehow take this password property and throw it into our template. So to do so, we'll go back over to our template file. We're going to find the input at the very bottom. So this is where we display the generated password. And then we're going to set the input, or excuse me, the value property on this input right here. And so this is going to be very close to what you see back over here. So on the input element, inside of a set of square brackets, we're going to put in value. We'll then put down equals, and then inside of double quotes, once again, we'll write out password. All right, so rather than discuss what's going on here, let's once again just save this file. We will go back over to our application. I'll now click on the generate button and I'll see the text my password appear inside there. So it's clear that this worked, but let's understand why it worked. But first off, let's review the syntax right here on that input element. So quick diagram once again. This is what we refer to as the property binding syntax. So we put down a set of square brackets. Inside there, we put in the name of the property that we want to set on that element. In this case, we want to set the value property. Then inside of a set of double quotes, we put down an expression to say what value we want to stick inside there. Just like we saw back with that event binding stuff, whatever we put inside of here is evaluated as code. So that is not a string that says password. That is some JavaScript code, technically TypeScript at this point, but we're just going to say it is code and it gets evaluated as code. So even though it really looks like we are saying put the string of password inside of that input, that is not the case. This means take a look at our component class instance. Take a look at its password property. So this one right here, and whatever that property value is, stick it in as the actual value for this input. Now, the really important thing here to also understand is that whenever the password property on the class changes, Angular automatically detects that, and it's going to automatically take the updated password property and throw it in as the new value to our input. There's a little bit of magic there, without a doubt. Now, just so you know, once again, we did not have to write on password there. We didn't have to say this.password. We didn't have to say component.password. We didn't have to say app_component.password or anything like that. We just put the name of the property from our class, and poof, it appeared. Now, one last thing I want to show you. Rather than putting a property name right there, we could just as easily try to call a method that would return the property we want to stick in instead. So for example, if we go back over to app component, we added in a new method called getPassword. And inside there, if we said return this.password, we can now try to call this method when getting our password and sticking it into the template over here. So instead of just referencing the property name password, we could call the getPassword method. Let's try saving that as well. I'll hit generate, and I still see the correct thing show up. Okay, so we've now seen how to set up an event handler, and we've also seen how to set up a property that gets bound to our class. Now, very last thing, I'm going to undo that last change. I just wanted you to know that we could put in any property name or method name inside there. So I am going to revert that back to password, and I'm going to remove the getPassword method from the class as well. Okay, so quick pause. Now that we've seen kind of how to get information into the template and out of it, let's continue working on our application in just a moment.